Well, Marty, what do you say? Should we go next door and check out the old hotel, formerly known as the courthouse?
Yep, because this bar is dry.
Well, sightseers, have I got a treat for you. Because today we're exploring Bannack, one of the most well-preserved ghost towns in all of Montana, if not the entire United States. And even more amazing is this is where it all started for Montana. The gold rush, its statehood. This is where it all went down, sightseers, and we're going to get to go check it out. There's like 60 well-preserved buildings still standing here in Bannack, a gallows, 2 cemeteries, and a couple of other interesting points of interest. So hold on to your hat, sightseers. It's going to be one heck of a ride today. To kick things off, we're going to start out here in Bannack's original cemetery. Located on the hill to the north of town, this cemetery was used between the years of 1862, when the town started, till about 1880. There are a number of religions and cultures out there that believe in order to experience true life, you need to experience death first. Well, here in the Bannack Cemetery, residents of all walks of life were brought together in one final resting place. It didn't matter if you were young or old, rich or poor, or whether your death was natural, accidental, or intentional. This is where you ended up if you're a resident of Bannack. As you can see, many of the markers are long gone, having deteriorated over time in Montana's harsh conditions. You wouldn't know it by looking at it, but there are over 60 souls who've been buried here. About a mile outside of Bannack, the town site, you'll find the second Bannack Cemetery. This cemetery was established either in the very late 1870s or at the very beginning of 1880. You can see that it was fairly common here for them to build like these wooden fences around the grave sites. I don't know if that's because wood was more accessible than iron. I know I've mentioned this in other videos when we're talking about cemeteries, but iron was often used to encircle a grave so that spirits, whether it be your own spirit or other spirits, wouldn't be able to get in or out. It was just one of those things that people believed back then, that your spirit would roam unless you would, keep it confined using the iron. You can see the path that leads you right up to the cemetery overlooking the town. This here is what was known as Bachelor Row. Now the thing to remember, sightseers, that by the way is an old privy, is that when the miners got here and the rush started, they didn't want to be troubled with things like putting up buildings just so they had a place to sleep at night. No, instead, they wanted to be working, making money. The gold had them struck with fever. And so what they did initially was basically roll out a bedroll at night, maybe sleep in a wagon, throw up some kind of little lean-to, whatever. But as winter drew closer, they realized they needed to get themselves out of the elements. Thus, they threw up these tiny little cabins. And they became dubbed Bachelor Row. Hold on, sightseers. Before we move on, I gotta check out this privy. It's a 3-seater.
What?
Talk about getting up close and personal with your neighbor. And actually, now that I've been looking at it, why does it appear that the building's missing a door? How does that work? I mean, wouldn't the people next door get a bird's eye view of the action? There had to have been a cloth flap or something that served as a door. I don't know. Moving on. I thought we'd take a closer look at some of the buildings that make up Bachelor Row. This one in particular caught my eye because it has an old wagon inside of it. How cool is that? It's not too often when you go out to ghost towns, at least the ones that we've been in, where you find an old wagon. But this one appears to be legit. It's got the old wheels here with the iron, I think that is, and then the wooden spokes. Oh, look, there's a name on the side of it. I think it says, sold by Midland Implement Company, Billings, Montana. Wow, and then look, there's the seat where the driver sat, and then you've got the place where they put their feet, and then the tongue that hooked up to the team of horses or mules, whatever it was that was pulling your wagon. Wow, this is a major piece of history just sitting here, and we get to see it. How about we check out a few more of these lovely bachelor pads, see what kind of accommodations we get if we were a minor back in the day. Well, this one's got the door open. Might as well go on inside. As you can see, they are in the process of, kind of putting this one into an arrested decay state. The thing is if they didn't do anything, they would likely topple over given their condition, I mean, this wood is getting pretty dried out, and wouldn't take much probably to knock it over a good windstorm, but by taking the time to stabilize and adding additional support systems to the buildings, we're able to come out and look at these buildings and imagine what life was like back then. Now, interestingly enough, Bannack is said to be haunted. And in fact, Ghost Adventurers did an episode here. I don't know exactly when that was. I haven't had a chance to look it up. Okay, we can walk in this one here and see dirt floor. And then it's got the log beams across the ceiling. Not much in the way of accommodations. They probably had several sets of bunk beds in here so that more than one miner could hang out in the shack after he got done working in the mine, probably came back, grabbed some grub, and crashed for the evening. Maybe he may have also gone over to the saloon for a few and then stumbled his way in and crashed for the evening. You know how that is. Okay, here's another one that we can walk into. This one actually has a step up and a wood floor. So this one would be probably, if you made a little bit more money, you were able to afford a nicer cabin. This one you can see they've got some stuff hanging out in here. Oh look, they've got some old tin cans that were likely left over from back in the day. Given that Bannack is said to be haunted, I wonder if we'll experience any kind of paranormal activity as we're walking through here. Although, if you follow any of those ghost hunting shows, they say that the only time is the nighttime. And I'm like, are spirits really that discriminatory as far as when they're going to come out? I don't know. Anyways, that's just my take on that. Coming up to the end of Bachelor Row, why don't we check out this one last little cabin here before moving on. I can see already it has a dirt floor, so basic accommodations here, not rolling in the high life. Well, this one actually has its own little built-in shelf with a lot of crunchy stuff laying on it. And then if you look up, you can see that this ceiling is constructed differently than the other one in that it's got these 3 large main beams that come across this way, and then these other boards going that way, and that they intersect in 90-degree angles here. And then by looking at this hole in the wall, we can get an idea of how the walls were constructed. You can see that they used logs that were kind of squared off, probably so that they could stack them more easily, and then probably not use as much chinking material, although if you look you can see there is some chinking material in between them to help with the gaps. Obviously whoever constructed this cabin knew what they were doing, because standing in here you can tell that this one is better insulated than any of the other ones. You can feel a remarkable difference in temperature from outside to here and compared to those other cabins, leading me to believe that this probably was a prime place to stay, even with a dirt floor. You know, back then they swept them clean. It would have been hard packed. You wouldn't have even known the difference. Well, let's move on. There are still plenty more sights to see here in Bannack, including those infamous gallows. Now, from what I understand, the building of the gallows came about as a result of Sheriff Henry Plummer, who ironically was also hanged by those very same gallows. Yep, you heard me right. See, back in those days, vigilante justice was swift. And as it just so happens, Sheriff Plummer eventually found himself facing his own sort of old Western-style justice at the hands of some citizens who called themselves the Vigilantes. As the story goes, in December of 1863, a man by the name of Red Yeager was captured and hanged by a posse from Virginia City. Before he met his demise, he reportedly confessed and implicated Sheriff Plummer as the leader of a criminal gang known as the Innocents. Now, how's that for a criminal gang name? Anyways, upon learning of Sheriff Plummer's involvement, the Vigilantes held their own sort of meeting in Virginia City, where they decided it necessary to execute their own form of justice. As a result, on January 10th, 1864, Vigilantes from Elder Gulch arrived in Bannack, and together with some local supporters, they set out to capture Sheriff Plummer and his 2 deputies. In the end, it is said that Sheriff Plummer, after pleading his innocence, begged the Vigilantes to give him a good hang. And that, sightseers, is how justice is served out here in the West. By the way, if you look up, you can still see marks that were left behind from the rope that was used during the different acts of justice that took place here. That was the grim reality of life out here back in those days, should you choose to take the wrong path, of course. That there is the jail. Seeing as we've been talking about the criminal element here in Bannack, I thought we'd stop there next. It's got a sod roof, metal bars on the windows, walls thicker than my size 9.5 boot, and a view of the path leading to the gallows. From what I understand, the design with the view facing the gallows was intentional because it was a way to deter lower level criminals from perhaps escalating into something that would lead them to that place.
Allegedly.
I don't know if you know the sightseers, but back in the day, they didn't use jails too often because they used other forms of justice, including the gallows. But you can see here in this jail that they've got a hole, which I'm assuming must have been for some sort of toilet at one time. And then over here, there's this little tiny window, probably to pass things through to the prisoners, or maybe to check on them occasionally. You can see that this room isn't very big, and it does have a window to the outside. But this room back here must have been like for the really bad solitary confinement type situation, because there is no window other than this leading into the next cell, which I don't know if that is original or not. And actually, if we go next door, we can see another building, a building with a better view of the gallows that Marty's going to tell us about.
And in this jail, when you were really naughty, they chained you to the floor. You can see the hooks in the floor yet.
And this is the really small window you got to look out, where you can see the gallows perfectly. Apparently back then people were really short, because Marty is like practically touching the ceiling with his head, and even
Slide a
me.
credit card up here.
Changing gears a bit, we're going to be heading on over into what used to be a doctor's house. But before I do that, I just want to say that I'm not going to engage in any kind of tomfoolery and try and pass this place off as a place that we discovered. No, this is a state park here in Montana, which means you can come on out here yourself if you have the opportunity and see Bannock. Now this house used to be Dr. Ryburn's house. He was one of the last doctors to practice here in Bannock, practicing between the years of 1897 and 1915. And as you can see, they have taken his house and staged it with artifacts dating back to that time period. You've got over here what used to be how people used to do their laundry. If I'm not mistaken, you would put your wash, clothing, whatever it is that you were cleaning, through this section here, and then you'd use this handle and crank it, and in the process it would wring out the water, I think. And then this item here that's hanging on the wall was used to beat your rugs, or your spouse when he stumbled home late reeking of that sinful whiskey and cheap perfume. Or you could always use that cast iron skillet off the stove, depending on your preference as a woman. Okay, I know. Enough clowning around. As you can see, this front room was set up as the kitchen, which is where a lot of the daily chores would take place for a woman back then. You've got your old, what appears to be maybe like a kerosene-powered stove, where you put your tea kettle on here, and whatever else you were cooking on the burner. And then you've got this really fancy stove here that piped up out of the ceiling. Here you would have had your skillet frying up bacon and eggs and whatever else you were maybe eating. And then you've got over here, oh, like your goods, you know, salt, sugar, flour, spices, whatever else. They even have the old ivory flakes for washing of fine things. And then we'll go on in this room over here. I think you'll find it pretty amazing. This is set up as a home which had not only a kitchen, but also like a dining area, separate dining area. And you've got like the old piano in this corner here. And then you've got like your buffet over there, your table here. You've got one of these, like, we call them curio cabinets. I think they're called something else back then. But pretty interesting to see all these old historic items here. You've got, McGuffey's 6th reader, and the 5th reader, and the 4th, and I imagine probably the 2nd and the 1st over there. You've got Valley of the Vines, sorry, I can't read without my cheaters. Although, Valley of the Wines sounds like a much better read, don't you think? And a few other things. Get them old curtains, ivory curtains, and the wallpaper that's peeling off in here. Who remembers when wallpaper was a thing? In my lifetime, I've lived in several homes over the years that have had wallpaper. I know some people just hate it. Personally, I love it. I think wallpaper is cool. And what was just as cool as wallpaper was having old wooden floors and baseboards that were like 6 inches tall. And chrome molding, although I don't see any in here, though the doorways have the lovely molding that goes up around the top. Yeah, I just love old homes. Why can't we go back to building homes like this, you know? When they actually had character. Anyways, moving on, we can see that this front room here was used as probably like your living room. And this would have been where you would bring company on the occasion that perhaps you would have company. You've got your old stove there to keep you warm. Look at this couch. I'm sure you had to have some money to have a couch that looked like that back in the day. Well, and given the fact that this is or was a doctor's house, it makes sense, right? You know, he would have been probably one of the more well-to-do individuals in town. Although, from what I understand, Dr. Ryburn knew that a lot of his, patients didn't have a lot of money. And so he would accept for payment anyways. If you didn't have the old cashola, he would take chickens and livestock and whatever else you could give him in return for his services. Now here's something that's rather interesting. It's talking about medicines, or patent medicines as they were called back then, and how makers were taking advantage of people by hawking these medicines at an exorbitant amount of money, and they didn't work. To quote Samuel Hopkins Adams, who wrote in The Great American Fraud, "Gullible America will spend this year, which was 1905, some $75 million in the purchase of patent medicines. In consideration of this sum, it'll swallow huge quantities of alcohol, an appalling amount of opiates and narcotics, a wide assortment of varied drugs, ranging from powerful and dangerous heart depressants to insidious liver stimulants, and far in excess of undiluted ingredients, undiluted fraud. For fraud, exploited by the skillfulest of advertising bunco men, is the basis of the trade." What does that remind you of? I'm not going to say any more about that. Before we leave Dr. Ryburn's house, I just want to point out what would have been the bedroom. And as you can see, they got a sock monkey. Oh, cool. I love sock monkeys. And then they've got a gingham dress. Of course, no bedroom would be complete without your bed. This one doesn't have a mattress. Probably a good thing. Can you imagine how bad that thing must be after all these years? And over here, we have the remains of Dr. Ryburn's wife's fur coat, an old baby carriage, and a ceramic pitcher with a bowl, which is how they used to wash up at night, and an old flour sack dress, and an outfit for a child. Now, I'm sure Dr. Ryburn's wife, if he had one, wasn't wearing no flour sack dress. However, the flour sack dresses were fairly common among the women who lived here in Bannack because, as they said, the families that were here were generally broke as a joke, meaning they were poor. You know, they came out here from wherever, probably sold everything just so that they could have enough money to come out here. And then they get out here and it's harsh and you're trying to live and your husband's probably slaving away in the mine and not making a whole lot of money. Well, you got stuck wearing flower sack dresses. Now this is what it's like to be in a ghost town with nobody around. Totally deserted, completely devoid of life except for you and the animals that inhabit it. This is what it would have been like after the last people of Bannock left. The gate to the Roe Graves house just sitting there, open, beckoning you to walk through it. Can you feel it? It's drawing you in, calling your name. Just come on inside, check it out. Of course, we haven't been in here yet, and if the door's open, we'll go on inside because curiosity, the cat. And I'm not going to let a few spirits of Bannock deter me from exploring this town by myself. Oh. Yeah, check this out, sightseers. Built in, they believe, 1866, 1867 time frame by William Roe, this was the very first wood frame house to be built in Bannock. In fact, Mr. Roe was one of the very first to get rich off of the gold here in Bannock, although his story of how he got rich wasn't because he was mining gold necessarily, even though he was one of the first to file a claim. Rather, Mr. Roe got rich because he developed more profitable interests, such as freighting, merchandising, and banking. It is said he and his brother Isaac opened a general store and meat market, and soon after licensed a banking institution to buy gold. That's how he made his money. Also a member of the vigilantes, he was involved in that sordid plumber affair that we talked about earlier. As you can see, looking around this house, at the time it was built, he must not have spared any expense and probably spent a pretty penny on it. Look here, how many times the linoleum has been covered over. You can see two different designs here, and then wallpaper, many different designs. Built with lat and plaster, I believe, which I don't think was typical of homes back then, at least not for the common folk. And then the house is also known by the last name of Graves, and that's because a gentleman with the last name of Graves acquired the home shortly after he developed the first electric gold dredge. Oh, look at that. The owners of this fancy home had a bird's eye view of Bachelor Row. I wonder how many drunken miners the ladies of the house got to see back in the day. Oh, man. This is something else, though, that this house is still standing here. It is in a bit of rough shape, but then again, you know, they are doing things to, you know, keep it so that it doesn't fall into further disrepair, like, of course, stuff like that. And as a wise friend of the family once said, a little plaster, a little paint, she'll be fixed up, good as new. There are quite a few rooms in here. Oh look, I just realized by looking up that they had those fancy type of doors with the windows up above that opened, tilted opened. That's not something you see too often anymore either in homes. Okay, you can tell that the windows here are really old because I don't know if you can tell through the video, but when I'm looking at it, I can see like waves in the glass. Cool. Holy man, you could get lost in this place if you're not careful. Oh, here we go. Here's some wallpaper on the ceiling that's fallen down. Look at that. Yikes. I guess they used to wallpaper everything in these homes. I don't know about you sightseers, but I can imagine that when this home was at the height of its grandeur, it was one of those places that was like, you know, super fancy, you know, with the special afternoon teas and all those things that the ladies, the cultured ladies did. The wives of the common folk were definitely not hanging out in here. We should probably head out because soon the sun's going to go down and then we won't be able to see anything else here in town. And as I said earlier, there's like over 60 buildings that are still standing here, some of which have been restored, others are in a varied state of decay. But regardless, I don't think we're going to get to all of them. I do want to highlight the most important ones for you. This little cabin here is known as Bootlegger's Cabin. And the reason for that is, according to local lore, back in the early 1960s, the last of the bootleggers to operate in Bannock operated out of this cabin. I haven't been able to verify that story, so take it with a grain of salt. As you can see, you've got this one big room here. I'm almost thinking that this house was built in, or cabin was built in several phases, beginning with this here, and then later, as we walk through this doorway, you'll notice that in here, it almost looks like this was added on, perhaps as a lean-to, and then maybe they added this even later. I don't know how soon after, but that's just the way it appears to me. If you look, you can see a sink there, or an old sink, no longer in use, obviously. And then we've got a little cubby there. I'm envisioning that this would have been the kitchen area, because you could have, you know, stored stuff in there, perhaps like your dishes and your pots and pans, and then this could have been where you would have stored your pantry items. If you look here, you can see linoleum. That, to me, looks a lot like linoleum that you would have seen in a kitchen. And then, if we look out this window back here, you've got a building. I'm not sure if it's this building here or that building there, but one of the buildings back here was where the still supposedly was found. Actually, now that I've been looking at this, I can see where there was a doorway here. So, probably the more likely answer to this was that it was two separate cabins, and then this here, this section here, was added to join them together, and then maybe they remodeled this to just be the kitchen, and then, I don't know, use this as their living quarters. Let's move on, because there's still more to see here in Bannock. If you look out there beyond the brush to where it looks like piles of debris, rock, sand, etc., those piles were diggings that were started in the 1860s where they were doing placer mining here. Now there's this obscure little path that if you follow it down to Grasshopper Creek, you'll find the remains of the first electric gold dredge that was built by F.L. Graves, the man who had moved into William Rowe's house, the grand house that we toured at the town site. And if we look here, we can already see some of the remains. There's this big chunk of metal sticking up out of the ground that's probably iron or steel. I'm not really sure. And then you've got this metal cable that's been laying here for many years, along with what looks like a huge bolt. And then you've got this other metal piece over here. And then if we go around the corner here, following along, like I said, it's an obscure little path. It almost isn't a path anymore over here. You'll find the remains of the boat that was used with this electric dredge. See, right here. And then there's some wood that was used. I'm not real too sure of how this contraption worked or what it looked like, but it's still here, basically being overtaken by Mother Nature. And then this is Grasshopper Creek. You can see that it's just kind of meanders around, goes down over in that direction and just kind of does its thing. But several miles downstream of here is where they first found gold back in 1862. And if you look up beyond this berm, I'll actually move up to a higher point so you can see it better. You can still see the piles that were left behind when they were digging for gold during the time that they were doing placer mining. Over in this spot, if you look closely underneath this tree and in the brush, you can see wood that's been left behind. I assume that's also from that original dredging system, gold dredging system. At one time, the creek must have run up higher. You can see where the bank just kind of drops off there. As you probably already know, it was fairly common to just abandon equipment in its place, sink it, submerge it, whatever, depending on where you were. And now, because the old Grasshopper Creek runs a lot lower than what it used to, it's available for us to see. Now, if you go directly to the west of the old Roe Graves house, you'll find what used to be the Methodist Church. Built in 1877, 15 years after the founding of the community, this was the only place in town that was built specifically for worship. A fact that apparently didn't sit well with many respectable women because it was frequently talked about in their diaries and letters. As you can see, we can go on inside. Marty, you coming in? What do you think, Marty? Do you think these pews or benches, whatever you want to call them, are authentic to the building?
I'm thinking some might be. In the back, some of you look on some of them around here. You got the hymnal holder. Some of them probably were brought in after the fact. They're definitely old. And like I said, with this one, very possibly original. This building.
One thing I haven't shown you yet, sightseers, is a school. Some of you may even be wondering, was there ever really a school here in Bannock? And the answer is yes. And this school happens to be very unique. It's one of the most unique schools I've ever seen, or what you'll have ever seen in history here in the United States. Something you need to know about school was that the early schools here in Bannock started out as subscription schools, meaning parents paid tuition so their children could attend private schooling in other homes. And as it just so happens, we're coming up upon the school now. At first glance, the school doesn't look anything out of the ordinary, except when we zoom in, we can see a very familiar looking emblem up there. Right there, you see it? You notice that? Yep, that is the very same emblem that you see on Masonic temples. Meaning that this building was built to house both a school and the local Masonic temple. How that came about is that in 1874, Bannock Masonic Lodge number 16 realized that there was a need for a school for the children here. As a result, they built this building with the school being on the first floor and the Masonic temple being up on the second floor. This school served students kindergarten through 8th grade for over 70 years. Why don't we go on inside and check it out? I hear that the Masonic Lodge actually meets in here now again. Oh, look. There's what the school would have looked like back in the day. They've got it set up. Oh, they have a math test for us. How many eagles are in $70? Well, I can't answer that because I don't know how many eagles or what eagles were worth back then. And then they also have what the rules for teachers were back in 1915. They aren't really any different than the rules we saw in Lena, Wisconsin when we toured that historic school. For example, you will not marry during the term of your contract. I think that was pretty typical all across the United States. They wanted their school teachers to be single women. Also, you are not to keep company with men. You must be home between the hours of 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. unless attending a school function. You may not loiter downtown in ice cream stores. You may not travel beyond the city limits unless you have the permission of the chairman of the board. That's interesting. And then you may not ride in a carriage or automobile with any man unless he is your father or brother. How times have changed. Back then, they really wanted their teachers to be the image of propriety or set the example for the children by acting in a certain way. You know what was deemed appropriate by respectable members of society. Well, let's move on. It's my understanding that we can access the upstairs, I think, by going out here and to the back. Yep, there's a stairway leading up. As I had said when we first entered, there is a Masonic lodge that's been reactivated here. They have a new number for it, and I think it's considered now more of like a historic type society where members, if you're in good standing with other Masonic lodges, you can become a historic member and help support the efforts here of keeping this building intact and whatnot. They have obviously it where you can't access the lodge itself. I find this totally fascinating. It's my opportunity to be that little fly on the wall, so to speak, where I can peek in and be nosy and see what the meeting room looks like. Being that I'm female and not a male, I can't join in on their association, become a member, and so this is kind of a rare sight for me. With Marty ahead of me, he was scoping out some of the buildings and discovered something interesting about this one here. From the outside, it looks rather ordinary, but inside...
A lot of branding on the walls. I mean, look at this. Come over and check out this one. And you see all these different types of branding on the wall. JC, the 3 lines, circle, or a diamond. Circles everywhere. But look at this. JC, and then they're making a JPC. Was this the work of cattle rustlers? Making brands that go over somebody else's brand? Like this here, that's SS. Were they making somebody, maybe Sam Smith, now into his brand being, they steal his cattle and turn it into that? In 88?
Ruh-roh, Marty. Looks like we got an old-fashioned mystery on our hands.
Let's get a hanging rope.
What?
Well, if they're rustling, rustling's a hanging offense.
Well, we've already been out by the gallows, and we know how justice is here out in the Old West, so...
Hang 'em. Ain't worth a bullet, just hang 'em. Take the old rope down from the church steeple bell, hang 'em, and then put it back.
I guess that's how they used to do things back in the day. Crude, but I guess effective. Well, now that we got an old-fashioned mystery on our hands, we can't leave the building without checking it out real quick. Although it is going to have to be quick because there's one more that I left for the very last, best for last, as they say, and I definitely don't want to miss showing you it. As you can see, this is a pretty standard home I'm thinking this was like your no frills type building, no frills home, if it was a home at one time. I don't know that for sure. But you can see hardwood floors, wood structure, glass windows, and several rooms with 2 exits.
I say you quit screwing around, let's go get a drink.
Well, apparently Morty's got different ideas than I do about what's best for last. He wants to go over to the saloon, whereas I wanted to show you the old hotel. But that old hotel also used to be the old courthouse, so you know where I'm going with that, right? Well, I guess we'll belly up to the bar, as they say, and check out the old saloon before going on over to the hotel. Welcome to Skinner's Saloon. Originally built on Yankee Flats, Cyrus Skinner moved this building to Bannock's Main Street in the spring of 1863. Oh look. Okay, I'm glad we didn't skip this because this ended up being more impressive than I thought it would be. Minus Marty messing around on the old keyboard there, the old piano.
Spirits don't like it.
Yeah, well, you're interrupting. You're causing a disruption. Look at this old bar. This old wooden bar that's here. Now, if I were to have a job back in the day, this is where I would have wanted to work. At the old saloon. Kicking people out, serving them drinks, you know, running the gossip joint of the town. Because, you know, besides being a place filled with sass and frass, yeah, I know, lame joke, but this would have been where the town gossip would have been flowing freely after a few drinks. And anybody with any sort of business sense would have hung out in here to get the lowdown on what was going on. Well, Marty, what do you say? Should we go next door and check out the old hotel, formerly known as the courthouse?
Yup, because this bar is dry.
Yeah, that bottle's empty. You've been here way too long. As I said, I wanted to save the best for last, and to me, the building that's most grand here in Bannock is the former Hotel Meade, formerly known as the courthouse. With its grand half-circle staircase that goes up and its high ceilings, you can tell that this was once a place of total grandeur. What are your thoughts, Marty? I've been checking that room out quite a bit.
Must have been if this was a courthouse to keep the records safe, because this wall is 2 foot thick.
2 feet?
And it's solid concrete. Yeah, that's about 2 foot thick.
Maybe that's also where the hotel kept its valuables later on. Yeah. Well, it appears, sightseers, we've come across our first spiritual intruder. A mouse. I'm not sure if he's sitting there because he's alive or... Oh.
He's dead.
Wah, 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 wah. Poor little guy. feel like we should have a few more for them. Okay, Marty's in a rush because I know it's getting close to sundown, and once sun comes down, Ghost Town's officially closed for biz. But I really wanted to talk about some of the history related to this building. Oh my, that is cool.
Back in the day, I used to work on commercial stoves when I had my refrigeration and appliance business. But this is old. I've never seen anything this old. I've seen a lot of old stuff, but this takes the cake.
Yeah, that is something exceptional. I've never seen anything like it before.
This thing's got to weigh 3,000 pounds. Wow.
Anything inside the oven?
No.
Now you know why, sightseers, I saved this for best for last.
Let's go take a tour up the grand staircase, see what's upstairs.
Yeah. Look at this staircase, Marty. Can you imagine back in the day coming down it? Oh, man. This reminds me of like an old Clint Eastwood movie. One of the motels, or excuse me, hotels that he would have stayed in, you know, to clean up and hanging out with some sketchy women. Here's one of the rooms that you could have gotten for the night with a view of a westerly sunset. Oh, and the old privy back there. Oh, and there's a deer coming to say hello. Just so you can get an idea of how tall those ceilings are. Look, they go up forever. Marty looks a midget. Looks like a midget standing there.
I'm 6'1".
Can you imagine having to heat this place? What it would have taken? It's kind of creepy here, being so close to dark. Turn my light on, get a better look. The rooms are empty. Latin plaster that you can see here in the walls. Very nice, very nicely constructed. But again, this was originally started out as the courthouse. It was the second brick courthouse built in the entire state of Montana. And then over here, you can see that we've got the back set of stairs, which would have been a great way for anybody to escape out the back door if need be. And then, of course, the other rooms back over in this corner. A little bit smaller than some of the other ones. Wow, I can't believe this is here. This is definitely one of the best ghost towns I've ever been to. Wouldn't you say, Marty?
Definitely.